Welcome back, folks, to the WP-Tonic interview show. This is episode 633. We got a great guest. I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation. We got Nathan Monk, the co-founder from Smile. Smile is a digital agency that has a niche in the higher education sector, also has produced its own platform, which was talked about recently on the Tavern. They're doing some interesting things. I haven't got my co-host. I know that's a great disappointment, Tribe, but he's off doing some real work. But he will be back next week, the beloved Stephen. I'm going to let Nathan introduce themselves, and then I'm going to talk about our major sponsor, and then we're going to be off. So, Nathan, can you give us your 30-second elevation pitch, and then we'll get on with the interview?
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm Nathan from Smile, and Smile is a company that helps higher education institutions and organisations with all manner of things on the internet. So we help senior leaders with digital strategies, and often the output is websites. They're typically high-profile flagship builds, as we call them, with complex system integrations. And that's what I do at Smile.
That sounds great. And like I say, before I go into our sponsor advert, what we're going to be discussing with Nathan is obviously Smile, its history, how he got into the WordPress ecosystem. Then probably in the second half, we're going to be talking about the specific positive and negative parts about his particular niche in the higher educational sector. Which should be of great interest to you, the developer implementers out there. And then probably in the bonus content, we'll talk about, based on my own experience, and I'll be interested to see Nathan's response, the problems when you're dealing with larger organizations that are mostly Microsoft based, and how you integrate WordPress or other open source systems into a culture that is either Microsoft or Oracle based. Should be a great show. I'm looking forward to it. But before we go into the meat and potatoes, I want to talk about our great sponsor. Obviously, if you're a regular listener, our sponsor's founder was on the show last week. I was traveling and going to a conference, but Stephen and Andrew did a great job, and that was Castos. Castos has become a great platform if you're interested in getting involved in podcasting for yourself or for clients. You need a consistent RSS feed and other elements that will make your podcasting experience much more joyful. Castos is just a great platform and a great team. The other factor is they've got honest upfront pricing. You just pay one price and you're not penalized for success, i.e. you can do as many podcasts and have as many downloads as you like, and you won't be charged anything different. So you know from day one what your costs are going to be. You cannot say that with a lot of the other platforms. I do know that you're going to say, well, Jonathan, some of them are free. The truth is nothing is for free. And when you look in, they have bandwidth limits, and they also sell your data to third-party people. Castos does not do that. Go over there. I suggest you buy one of their plans, and please tell them that you heard about them on the WP-Tonic podcast. It helps them and it really supports the show. So, Nathan, let's go into it. How did you start in WordPress, and then how did that lead to being the co-founder of Smile?
I mean, my experience with WordPress goes way back. I remember being at high school and just kind of really getting into web development stuff, and before long you come across WordPress in some way or another, and did a few bits there. I actually had a few kind of bad experiences which turned me off, not just from WordPress but from just web development for a while. Um, as it
I'm so
happens.
surprised. I'm so.
And then I went to university and I studied like a visual communication is what I studied. And as part of that, I picked up web development again because it just seemed like a good way for me to separate myself, I guess, from other people that perhaps hadn't had that experience and stuff, and actually just started to enjoy it again. Towards the end of my university studies, I'd met with my now co-founder, and we graduated in the height of the financial crisis back in 2009. This was a time
You
where
are
people.
making me feel very old very quickly, Nathan. Do you know that?
Sorry. But that was a time, when particularly in design communities, big agencies were asking students to pay for work experience. It was nuts then. And me and a friend, we were like, oh no, this isn't the way. We're not going to pay for that. And we said, oh, my friend came to me, have you ever considered starting your own agency? I was like, no, I haven't. And then that whole notion got completely out of control. And then, so I remember for our final major project at university, we'd put this agency together. We'd like rented a studio and everything. And then, the day after we graduated, we were like, right, we're this business now. Better go and do it. And for the better part of 4 years, we kind of, the typical kind of startup struggles and stuff like that. And then later down that journey,
You don't mind me asking how did you get your initial customers? You start this, know nothing fundamentally about
yeah,
running an agency. The main thing is, lead generation and getting, when you start, you have to literally take any client that comes on your radar and you have to deal with their madness as well. But how did you get into a position where you started having a reasonable flow of leads?
we were kind of lucky at university. We'd entered me and a group of friends, we'd entered a few competition briefs and things like that, and won and got paid work off the back of those. Some lecturers at university kind of introduced us to people like industry briefs and things like that. So we'd managed to develop a bit of a fledgling portfolio before we were out there.
That's great. I went to Angular University. I think they're called the Ruskin Angular
Yeah.
University, and it was. I went as a mature student in the night. Well, it was important. I'm the only person in my family ever to go to university, and I had this romantic. And I was in full-time employment running a successful business.
Oh man. Yeah.
And I went there, and I wasn't prepared to spend 4 or 5 years as a part-time student. So I went as a full-time, and it was a total waste of money and time. I actually knew more about web development and design than most of my lecturers. Literally, it was but the only thing is that it was before the massive student loan racket was imposed upon students. So it didn't actually cost me any money. So that was the only good aspect. I'm just saying that to warn people. The only other thing is, a year after I graduated, I decided I wanted an MA for some bizarre reason. And I went to the London School of Print and Design. And as a part-time, it was an 18-month course. And I only had to attend 1 day a week, and the rest I could do remotely. And it was a joyous experience. They were really a fantastic crowd. The lecturers actually worked in the industry as graphic designers or developers. And it was a totally different experience. I learned an enormous amount. And it just shows you, it just varies, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And, I had my fair share of bad experiences at university as I did good ones. I think it's just what you make out of the good ones that you kind of take away from. I don't, going into university, I had no expectation of starting a business or anything like that, and it was honestly by chance that my now co-founder came over to me in the library and just said, have you ever thought about starting your own agency with me, sort of thing. And like I say, it spiraled from there. But the thing that we really struggled with was the business side of things for years. You know, we were very young and naive and thought that things would roll into us, and we very quickly found out that that's not how it works at all. And we were kind of lucky enough, I guess, to some extent to survive those first years and get through them. And the hard work and perseverance, I hope has paid off. And from there, you know, we kind of got what I see as our first big break, which was where, you know, somebody had heard about us through all these various different creative things that we'd done on websites and stuff, and they happened to work at a local university. And that was initially how we got into this vertical of the education sector. Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit more about that? You know, what were the initial challenges, and what was, you know, if you can't discuss it, you might have signed a non-disclosure agreement. I don't know, but if you did, just tell us. But can you tell us what that gig was and how did it pan out?
Yeah, I mean, the job ended up being something that we called a virtual campus, and ultimately, it's not actually what I think you would think it to be in 2021 in hindsight. It was actually like this kind of Google Maps overlay of their campus, and we dropped all of these different pins of different types in there so you could explore the campus, you know, digitally and all this sort of stuff. And we'd embedded video and embedded 360 stuff, and you know, at the time it was pretty out there. It was ahead of its time to some extent, or at least that's what I like to tell myself. But the challenges, of course, were not really the job. Wasn't the project that was the problem. It was kind of getting through the door in the first place, and it was our first experience in having to pitch and tender for a job at a quite serious procurement level and stuff like that. So today we've obtained most of our larger clients by competitive tenders and stuff like that, and we won one this year, and it took over 12 months. The process of winning the job took over 12 months to get there, but this was a bit smaller back then, but it was still 3 bids. You had to do a written submission, then you had to come and do a presentation, and you had to, you know, meet the brief and all those sorts of things. And you know, that was an eye-opener for us. And there's a lot of conversation right about procurement, tenders, and free pitching and all that sort of stuff. And for a long time we've done that.
Yeah, we're going to be delving into all this in the second half and the bonus, because I don't know if you're going to agree, we've got a couple of minutes before we have to go for our break, Nathan, but it's so easy to underbid for these type of contracts and find out when you actually look at the amount of hours that you're working for minimum wage, that it's actually damaged your business rather than be. The only good thing is that if you hope they're going to open more doors for you, but you can't keep doing jobs where you're hardly making any money and you're making less than a minimum wage, can you?
Yeah, it's very true. It's definitely one of the bigger pitfalls to watch out for.
And it's so easy to underbid when you're in a free bid situation, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot of different types of tenders, and they can make it much harder sometimes as well. You know, there's some tenders where there's literally no budget guidance at all, so you kind of just pitching out there and taking against the brief. And sometimes you get the range of stuff, and you're like, well, obviously I need to bid at the lower end of that to win the job, and there's other tenders where they're like, well, the lowest bid will get 100% of the mark for this, and suddenly you find yourself in kind of a race for the bottom to some extent, and that's dangerous. That is dangerous, because I think it makes you question the value and worth of your time, and I think that's one thing that you need to be really confident about is this is how I price the way that we bid for work, and that's what it costs.
You got to be in a financial position where you can just walk away from the job.
Yeah, and in the formative years of business, that can be really difficult, because that's where every contract counts, right? And it's really difficult. But you can't see the wood for the trees, like you said, because sometimes it's counterintuitive. And whilst you may have won the contract, you may have won the money, you're over-servicing that job.
It's very similar to our personal lives. As you get a little bit mature, it's you concentrate on finding the right partner, finding the person to share your life. But the truth is, the key to it is knowing when to walk away from the wrong people and walk away quicker than later from you. And a lot of people don't understand that, do they, Nathan?
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. And that kind of, not all contracts are good contracts either. You can sometimes find yourself in almost toxic relationships in a work context as well,
Yeah, I think that's right. Well, I think it's time for us to go for our break. When we come back, I think I've been talking a little bit too much, I feel, but hopefully I've contributed a little bit and haven't spoilt the interview for you, Tribe. But I think it's been a great interview, and we got some great useful insights for you. We'll be back in a few moments. We're coming back. We got the co-founder of Smile, Nathan Monk. We've been talking about his niche, his experience. I think it's been great. Also, I just want to point out, you've listened to Launchflow's advert, and both with Launchflows and Castos, they're offering a great special deals to the WP-Tonic tribe. With Castos, you get 6 months at 50% reduction. For Launchflows, you get a special lifetime deal. All you have to do is go to the WP-Tonic backlink newsletter, and you will see those special offers, and you want to take them up. So, Nathan, right, so you kind of built this niche, you got your first break, it led to some other work, and then you came on like we discussed before we went live. You got on my radar about that piece in the tavern, and about you attempting to build out a more flexible, this is my interpretation of the piece, is that you're attempting to build out a more flexible, more focused subtake of WordPress that's really focused on higher education, but still open source in its fundamentals and philosophy. Would I be correct in that summary?
I think that's a pretty good summary, actually. Yeah. I mean, I'd be happy to talk to you about how we got to that point, and kind of how we got there. So after we kind of won that first job in higher ed, we found out that as a community, higher ed, word spreads and people talk, and
I'm amazed.
But it's a great thing when you do good work. It's absolutely fantastic. If you ever have a bad experience,
education and gossiping, I would never believe it.
But that's we quickly won more work just through word of mouth, and eventually we decided to double down. So at that time we were still kind of traversing many different sectors and trying to kind of jack of all trades, if you like. And then we made this decision a couple of years in, after we picked up more work, that we were going to really double down on the higher ed space and become a digital agency for higher ed. And that then, for whatever reason, work just catapulted, and we were just getting loads of work through the door. And I think it's because people, they kind of knew what Smile was about at that point. And so then we built up this portfolio of work, and one of the things that we really began to notice is that there's lots of projects, and they're all for different universities and different needs and things like that. But fundamentally, the requirements are actually largely shared, and there's a lot of similarities between projects and universities and requirements and needs and all that sort of stuff. And I got involved with a community several years back now called WP Campus, which is literally where WordPress and education meet. It's a fantastic community.
How have you found it? Because I spoke to one of the major organisers, Sherry, and I tried to join it, and I didn't find it a most welcoming community. Actually, I found I tried to ask people on the show, and I got the normal passive aggressive response, which is no response.
No way.
I found it a very cliquey community. Basically, obviously, you're going to disagree with me. I thought I would be honest with you. So your experience has been totally different.
I felt with WP Campus that I'd really found, I'd found my people, I'd found my tribe there. I didn't realise there was such a big community around these two things that I was involved with, WordPress and higher education. And I've had so many positive experiences out of it. And I'm sorry to hear you haven't.
But yeah, it might be me.
And one of the things,
I think I'm pretty friendly, and maybe I should redouble my attempts to get involved with it, might I?
I'll find you in the Slack and show you some love. Don't worry. Right. They run conferences every year. So pre-pandemic, they're in-person conferences, and I'd flown out and kind of attended some of them, and met some really interesting people with some cool ideas, and that's where I then kind of met a co-founder in a new venture that I'm part of, which is EduPack, and Blake, who is that person, who kind of presented this work that he'd done for Tulane University. I was like, whoa, that's so cool. We've got people coming to us with this same thing. We should have a chat and see if this can go anywhere between the two of us or whatever. And Blake then flew out to the UK later on a holiday. We met for a coffee in Oxford, and just one thing led to another, and we were like, oh yeah, we could totally do something. And again, before you know it, here I am doing this thing called EduPack. And ultimately, I think it is a collective effort of our experiences in both WordPress and higher ed that we're trying to fill the gaps in WordPress that higher ed needs day to day.
Well, that's really interesting what you just said, because as you were saying it, I think that's one of the strengths, but can also be one of the can be a slight negative of the WordPress community. The strength is that you're meeting these people. They could be kind of slightly in the same sector. They could be competitors, but there's a more of a community cooperative vibe about the WordPress community, which you don't get in other sectors of open source or more traditional software models. But the only problem is you can also lose focus on your own agency and go into these cooperatives, and they suck a lot of time, and they don't make you can't make a living out of it, basically. What's your own? Do you think there's anything in what I've just said, and that how have you balanced that out yourself?
I mean, the balancing act is apt. You know, it is very difficult to balance both of those interests. And with EduPack, we kind of made this decision pretty early on to basically put a year of work into free, and build out, work with educators and marketers and developers to understand the needs that we could help them with. I think I'm fortunate in as much as the two projects that I'm working on, i.e. Smile and EduPack, they're not that different from one another. There's definitely ways in which they complement one another. So the learnings that I learn in EduPack, for example, only enhances what I take back to the team at Smile. So long as they're not completely, in complete juxtaposition of one another, yes, it's a balancing act, certainly of time, and I'm lucky enough to have a fantastic team around me at Smile that I can get to help me with tasks that I may not be able to do because my focus is drawn somewhere else. But also I hope that I'm contributing a lot of extra value in bringing that stuff from EduPack back into Smile too.
One of the things about the Tavern article that was slightly, I wouldn't say confusing, but I thought, this is only my personal take on the actual piece, Nathan, is, and I'm pretty much, and I've said this publicly a few times, I love don't get me wrong, I love the Jetpack team as a group of people. When we could go to WordCamps, they were always there, and I found them some of the coolest people at WordCamps and the most generous in their time. But as a platform, I despise Jetpack. I absolutely despise it with a passion. I think it's one of the biggest load of crap in the WordPress ecosystem. And you seem to be pitching in your to Jetpack, and I thought, this is a shame. This is craziness in its highest. Why would you want to pitch yourself to something that's total crap? I don't know if you seem to be laughing and taking it in the right spirit, but can you explain, has your position changed, or do you feel I'm totally incorrect in what I'm saying? Because a lot of people do totally disagree with me.
Your position is not uncommon, I must add, particularly in the HE community. And before Jetpack made quite a lot of changes, the kind of bloatware perception was definitely rife. I don't have an opinion either way necessarily on Jetpack. What I think I quite like about Jetpack is the sustainability of its business model to some extent, and that's something that initially we're very keen to look at and replicate. We spoke to some great people in Automatic from Newspack and stuff like that as well, which is kind of similar-ish type of affair. And so actually more of our influences are taken from things like Newspack, but not so many people know Newspack as they do Jetpack, I suppose. But our take is constantly evolving. I was in a Slack discussion today about how do we make all of this happen. We wanna be really sure that it's not about people. We don't want to be exclusionary to the point where EduPack is only for people that can afford it. We want to make it so that everybody can use EduPack, but we also want a way to be financially sustainable as well.
Are you questioning your linkage with Jetpack a little bit more, or are you still committed to having this linked to the hip to Jetpack?
No, there's no link to Jetpack. I think more than anything, that's where we've drawn inspiration from how we might run the business side of things. But at least now there's lots of different avenues that are on the table that we're exploring, and we run monthly. We call them brain trusts. We run monthly brain trusts with higher ed professionals every month, and they're really keeping us grounded. We like to get the feedback from them. They tell us how they want it to work, and we build features and our approach around them. So the Jetpack kind of model was just the starting point a way back now, and now we're being led by the sector, and like I say, constantly developing. We've got this kind of stretch goal, if you like, to have something in our cloud offer launched later this year.
Right.
But like I say, we're just constantly reassessing.
It's definitely needed, because people are not aware of some of the most popular platforms are very open source or quasi commercial. They're either very old, very basic, or they're very, very basic and very, very expensive. People will be aghast about what the tools that are out there, aren't they?
One of the driving factors was, it costs on average a university $15,000 to create a microsite, and it shouldn't. It just shouldn't.
Well, there's some reasons to that are not only about technology, which we're going to be discussing in the bonus content, mate.
Yeah, this is true. But yeah, there's. I think today's technology can afford a lot of pace, and there are definitely some cultural changes that can happen in the sector and things like that. But also, I think that there are some definite advantages that we can implement that immediately will help universities and colleges to be more prolific in their content generation.
Right, we're going to wrap up the podcast part of the show. Nathan's going to stay on for our bonus content. You can watch the bonus content and the whole interview on the WP-Tonic Facebook page, and also join us on the WP-Tonic Facebook Mastermind group page, where you'll be able to see our live Friday show, our outrageous roundtable show. You'll also be able to see my personal rants against certain individuals in the WordPress community and in tech in general. I know you find that very entertaining. And you can also join our newsletter and really be part of the tribe. Like I say, go to WP-Tonic backlink newsletter and also sign up for our newsletter and really get the inside scoop about my views and that. Nathan, how can people find out more about you and more about Smile?
Well, the easiest way is to go to wearesmile.com. You can find out about us there, and there should be links to all the different places that you can find out about us. LinkedIn, we run lots of LinkedIn live streams and things like that there. But yeah, I would definitely recommend that people go and visit us on wearesmile.com.
That's fantastic. We'll see you next week. Remember, go over to the WP-Tonic Facebook page and watch the bonus content. We'll be back next week. I'll be back with my great looking and more intelligent co-host, Stephen, next week. And we got some, I know I say this, but actually in the next 2 months, we got some, like Nathan, but we got some real heavy hitters and fantastic guests coming on the show. I think you're going to be blown away with the interviews, and we're finishing hard, well and strong to the end of the new year. We'll be back next week with another great interview. We'll see you soon. Bye. So on to bonus content. There's the kind of 2 areas I want to cover in this bonus content. One was linked to our discussion before we got live, Nathan, about the culture and dealing with the internal politics of universities and large organizations and the consequences, and also dealing with ingrained IT departments that do have a kind of, based on my experience of working with larger clients, have a attitude towards open source, which isn't and this is a generalization, isn't fantastic and tends to be out of date. But before we do that, I also want to talk about, I know with Cheryl and a couple of other leading people, and this also affects how your own agency have dealt with this. I know there were some leading people in the WP campus movement that was extremely unhappy with how Gutenberg was proposed and how it affected accessibility. Morton Hendrickson, he's a personal friend of mine,
Oh, cool.
and just a fantastic quality individual of the highest
Yeah.
order. And I think he was quite involved with WP Campus to some extent. Um, I know that those concerns were just, this is my interpretation, were just brushed aside, not dealt with in the way of courtesy that I would have chosen to have dealt with them. Did this sour a lot of people in the WP campus community? Only a small question.
I think
If you don't
Gutenberg
want to
is.
go there, you can say you
No,
would
no,
rather
no. I
not
mean,
answer it.
I'm. Gutenberg is still contentious. I think for a lot of people, it still is a big talking point. There are still universities that haven't adopted it and are still worried about it. WP Campus actually did an accessibility audit of Gutenberg a few years back, and I
It was
think,
ugly, wasn't it?
to be fair, Automatic got behind it in the end, I think, and stumped up some cash to make it happen.
Personally, myself, that was a total PR job, in my own opinion. But that's my own opinion.
Well, I think there was a discussion recently about, oh, wouldn't it be great if there was another audit a couple of years on to see how far it has come? And that there have been massive movements towards improving the accessibility of Gutenberg, and it's ever improving. Did it long term damage perceptions? I don't know. Maybe for some people, I definitely see more and more people adopting Gutenberg though, like every month now. We were hesitant.
I personally could understand. My own personal stance on this. It was it was very regrettable and almost totally avoidable. It was another communication PR total train wreck, in my own opinion, that could have been totally avoided.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and you can put two and two together and stuff. But what I would say is, so the latest deal that's kind of related is around the Classic Editor plugin, and there were a lot of panicked people, myself included, when somebody like retweeted and they were saying like, oh, it's only 100 days before we lose support for the Classic Editor plugin.
Yeah,
Like, oh, God.
on our build outs and our kind of quasi hosting platform at WP-Tonic, we are still committed to Animator. We are looking at Gutenberg. I don't think, in all consciousness, we do have hosting clients that use Gutenberg, but and we let them at it, and we will support it. But I don't think it's really. I would be confident in recommending it even now. It's probably still got a year. It is coming on hard, and I'm very supportive of it in a way. I totally understood why WordPress.com needed a better solution there. I think it's very beneficial to the WordPress community that somebody goes to WordPress.com rather than Squarespace or Wix. And I just think it was handled in a really shitty, crappy way, basically.
Yeah, I get that. I think that's getting better. You know, where I was going with the classic editor plugin is it feels like they've been able to listen to the community a bit better, take those criticisms on board, and handle it in a, you know, in a much better way this time, I think. So again, I think we're seeing improvements there, and that's only a good thing. I mean, I'm a big fan of Gutenberg. I really enjoy it, and as when I'm in content creator mode, it's my jam. I love it. It's such an easy experience, and there's things about it that constantly surprise me, and I'll do something and be like, oh wow, that's so cool.
Well,
Sure,
maybe that's some of the problems. Too many surprises are. The other factor I wanted to put to you as an agency and a self-taught coder, you know, you taught yourself. You didn't go to a classical computer science degree. And some people say the best coders are the self-taught ones. Other people say, you know, is slightly disadvantage of not knowing the basic principles. I don't know. I think that's up in the air. But obviously, you got in and you self-taught PHP. You know, because of Gutenberg, the focus is on React and JavaScript. How have you coped with that personally yourself, and how has your agency coped with that?
It's ongoing. We've consciously needed to push ourselves into that React groove a bit more. Gutenberg's been quite kind in that respect because you can focus around block development a bit more and have a real focus and solve that one problem rather than just trying to build something out. But there's huge advantages to it as well. I see it. I see the vision for it, and I'm totally on board with it. Recently, earlier this year, actually, we released a prospectus, a digital-first prospectus for a university, and it was a headless React build on top of WordPress ultimately. And you know, some of the advantages that afforded us were just fantastic. So I totally buy into it. Am I a React superstar? No, absolutely not. Work in progress, 100%. But I can 100% see the vision, and it's something that we're definitely realigning with. We can see that, you know, WordPress isn't just this kind of pure PHP thing anymore. It's definitely got these multiple tracks, and
well, it was another area where if WordPress was going to move on in interface and usability, it had to do something fundamental, didn't it? Because it was losing traction when it came to customization, UX functionality, and basic usability compared. What was your response to them choosing React? Because that, in some ways, was very controversial, wasn't it, for a time, and still is to some extent, isn't it?
Yeah, we were quite hesitant about the whole Gutenberg thing to begin with. We were like, oh, you know, we're going to hold off for a while on this, and we did in the end. We held off until a few of these things blew over, and the whole React conversation, I remember reading all the stuff about, you know, the licensing of it and the compatibilities or the incompatibilities, all this sort of stuff. And you know, it was a concern because it was an instability, if you like, in the community around it. I was pleasantly surprised, I'll add, that React went the way that it did with its licensing and stuff like that.
It really did show the power of the WordPress platform and community, really, because they're not noted to take external pressure or respond to it, are they?
No, and I thought it was a benefit for everybody, and I think it was a great move, and I think it was a great move for WordPress. It was probably a great move for React as well. It definitely feels like one of the more dominant players now.
Angular was the main. You know, there was some open source libraries out there. Moulton was pushing. See, I forgot its name, New or something. But Angular, but. Actually, I'm more happier that they chose React because Angular under Google's got a terrible reputation for pushing projects and then just jump. Yeah, they are a nightmare to deal. They really don't listen to anybody, do they?
I guess there was probably an element of pick your poison, and yeah, I'm glad it went the way that it did in hindsight. And yeah, I think it's worked out for everybody pretty well.
Right, let's go to the final area, because obviously you've got better things to do than that with me. But I think it's been a great discussion. Is is how do you deal, first of all, with the peculiar cultures? This is my spin, and I'd be interested to see your own. The peculiar cultures of higher education. When I first started dealing with clients in that sector, I had this kind of romanticized view that we had these really intelligent group of people, and they're going to be, because they're so bright, all these PhDs floating around, that it was going to be sweetness and light. I found them to be the most argumentative, bitchy crowd of people that really resent one another and the different departments with the most venom I've ever seen, even in the most brutal American corporations.
Oh my
I've
god.
seen more backstabbing and basically hatred of one another in university. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I wasn't expecting it quite so extreme. I mean, I've seen bits of it, but I've actually found the sector to be really pleasant to work in. But there's definitely bits. There's kind of classic things of academics versus marketing and the other way around, and that sort of stuff. I think it's quite political. I think that's fair.
Yeah.
But we're dealing with huge scale organisations,
Yeah.
thousands and thousands of
How do you
employees.
deal paralysis through committee, though? How have you got any insights? I know there's no magic wand, but if maybe you can give your quick perspective out, because you could literally just want to die in the end with these freaking. They got a love for meetings. This
I
crowd, haven't
mean,
they?
so much so that there's acronyms for all this sort of stuff, like hippos, like the loud voices in a meeting. You'd be around a table of 10 people, and there'll just be that one person who basically shouts the
And
loudest, and that's who get.
because of the pandemic and the necessary. Do you think it's got worse, or has it helped that you're not having these personal meetings?
It's Meetings take a little bit of a different form. It's funny because when I'm having internal conversations with my team, everything's really like casual and quite laid back. But you'll go onto a Teams meeting with like a university department, and some are so formal, so rigid, and yeah, there's a lot of like etiquette. I get it. They're big organisations, and that's just loads of red tape and all that sort of stuff, and things have got to go through a chain of command and stuff like that, and think things just naturally take longer than if you're used to working in a smaller, agile team. And to some extent, there's definite self-awareness from universities as well about this sort of stuff, because in tenders you'll see like, we want to work in an agile manner and all this sort of stuff, and does it ever really come off? Who knows? I read this great thing recently that talked about Wagile, which is basically just waterfall mixed with agile, and sometimes it can feel like that, because you've got the kind of working groups that really want to do agile philosophy and get stuff done, but then higher ups are just more used to waterfall and but that's what I think you kind of competing with, is so many different ways of working, so many different perspectives, whereas with us in
I'm
a small
not keen
team,
on all these. I'm just keen on getting stuff done.
you,
But there we go. Let's go on to something even more gruesome. You're dealing with entrenched biases and views of university IT departments and their views around open source, particularly WordPress. what's your experience on that? And if have you got any insights about how to deal with it? Would you agree that that it's there to start off
It's
with?
it's still there, sadly. Not in. It's gotten a lot better. I mean, 6 years ago, terrible. You'd hit it almost all the time, and half of the job was defending against these kind of assumptions that were out there. Now I think there's been quite a big shift, and there's a lot of really forward-thinking IT departments out there that have changed their mind on that. But it does still exist. We came across it recently, and we were told like that one university just wasn't going to touch WordPress with a barge pole because it was insecure. And you know, it's hard to see that sort of stuff still going on in 2021. So yeah, sadly it does still exist. It does.
But also, to be fair, the integration tools for integrating WordPress in Microsoft are for very, and you could argue the reason for this. Oh, the other thing also, the new I'm struggling for the right word here. The new battlefield is WordPress and Salesforce in some way. I regularly, how can we integrate WordPress totally in our, we're going to take this as an opportunity to throw out Microsoft and become the cloud, Salesforce orientated, and integrate WordPress and our marketing systems into, and it's a freaking not they have the Salesforce consultant has got hold of them big way and sold them this vision that's not going to really pan out
Did,
that well, is it?
didn't Salesforce just like throw a load of money at WordPress and
three
Automatic
hundred
recently?
million dollars actually.
It's just
So it's peanuts.
no big deal.
They make that in a month.
I'm kind of interested to see what that's going to mean for the relationship between those two. I'm sure it'll probably end up more so in like the
I
VIP
wasn't
end of
actually
it.
being. I am very English, even though I've been living in America, and I am rather flippant. But actually, that is the reality. 300
Yeah,
million for Salesforce is literally just peanuts.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know. We do a lot of integration work, and we do a lot with APIs and stuff like that, and it always sounds like the dream, like, oh, there's the API there, it's gonna be great.
It's all gonna integrate. It's all
And
gonna
then
work, isn't it?
there's just like one call that's missing that just means you can't do what you really want to do, or something like that, or it's just really badly documented or something, and it's a lot of hard work. I think the payoff is great actually when you get an integration right and it does the thing. It's like, yeah, that's really cool. That does something awesome.
Well, my
And then it
main
just
problem
feels like,
is that Salesforce, as a tool for Salesforce, their modules around marketing, they bought. I forgot the name of the company they bought, and their integration compared to some of the other more corporate marketing automation platforms is rather pathetic, actually. And they're trying to sell it as an all-embracing tool. Uh,
maybe it's kind of scope and vision is just too big. Maybe it's trying to do too many things and isn't getting
which
those basic things right.
Well, you could argue that about WordPress, but WordPress, it's got a much more. That's it's handled it in some ways, I think, better, because you do have these particular specialist sectors and plugins and silos of expertise in a bigger community. I just feel in some ways it's done better. It has its problems, but I
Oh
think
yeah.
yeah, sorry about that. No,
uh,
I think we need, because I want to be respectful of your time, and we're coming up to the hour, and I do promise my
sure.
guests to get them out of this nightmare in the hour mark. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Mm.
Hopefully, I haven't butted in too much. I'm sure I have, but I want to apologise. But I think it's been a great discussion. Hopefully, you agree to come back on the show in the new year.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be great. Thank you very much.
We're going to wrap it up now. Like I say, we'll be back with my co-host. Another great discussion next week. Thanks for being a part of the tribe. We'll see you soon, folks. Bye.